First Samuel 21. I believe this was part of the scripture reading for today. Working our way through First Samuel, you're seeing all this history of David and Saul. Samuel has passed away at this point in the story, but the book continues to be named after him for a good while yet. And in the last couple of chapters, you've seen David get in trouble with Saul. Saul becomes jealous. David has slain his 10,000s, and Saul, by comparison, he's only slain a few thousand people himself. And so Saul tries to kill David a couple of times. David runs away. Saul gets angry at Jonathan, his own son, tries to kill Jonathan. And that's when David knows it's time to go. But when you get to 1 Samuel 21, you run into some problems that David well, he causes for himself. And as you go through chapter 21, you just see this list of mistakes David makes. He's obviously quite stressed out about the situation, but that doesn't mean it's good when he goes and does these things. For instance, in verse 2 of 1 Samuel 21, David goes to this priest Ahimelech, and he says, part of his sales pitch for why he's there, he says, "The king instructed me to do something," but he then said, "Don't let anyone know the reason I'm sending you or the instructions that I've given you." In other words, Saul has given me the secret mission. That's a lie. He hasn't said anything like that. But David hasn't thought about the consequences for this, and so he just kind of lies because it's convenient. You'll see some consequences tomorrow in chapter 22. All of the priests get executed because they helped David. They didn't know. But David didn't think about it. David just went and did what seemed right at the moment. You see a couple verses later in verse 4, he's asking for bread. He's asking for some kind of food. And the priest says, "We don't have any. We have only holy bread, and really that's only supposed to be for the priests." It's the bread of the presence. It was removed from the presence of the Lord in verse 6. It was for the holy people, not David. But David ignores that law and he takes it anyway. Jesus will call back to this in Matthew 12 and reference David's sin here. He just goes against the law of God because it's more convenient for him. And then you see down in verse 8, this is just a foolish example, but David asks about a weapon. Can I acquire a weapon? The only weapon that's available is Goliath's own sword. And so David claims that, but then he walks down in verse 10, he flees Saul's presence and he goes right to Gath, which is Goliath's hometown. I think they would know his sword. And so this is foolishness. It's sin and it's evil, but it's also just unintelligent. And you wonder why. How would this have been different if David had just taken a second to pray about it? And how many times do we find our own lives that we start doing sinful things because they're easy, and we start just doing downright foolish things because it's a lot simpler to do that and get it done than it is to actually contemplate what you're doing and the choices you're making and how you might make righteous and just intelligent ones instead. If David had thought to pray about it, maybe he wouldn't have lied to a priest, and maybe the priest would still be alive. If David had thought to pray about it, maybe he would have gone and gotten bread from somebody's house instead of stealing it from God. If David had thought about it, maybe he wouldn't have run away to Philistia, his mortal enemies. Maybe he would have found a way to stay in the land of Israel, still running from Saul, but maybe he wouldn't have had to go and plea madness before the court and drool into his beard to try and get out of a bad situation. Way too often in this life, we get caught up in the things that are happening and we forget that there's a God on our side. We get caught up in the things of the world and suddenly we start going off the right track. We start going into sin and convenience instead of heading towards the Lord. But if we would just take a minute and pray about it and recenter ourselves and remember who God is and remember who we're working with, maybe we wouldn't make some of these foolish decisions. That's the lesson for tonight. The invitation is the pretty standard one that if there's anything you need spiritually, if there's any way we can put you in contact with God, we'd love to do that. So we're going to sing a song about prayer. sing a song about recentering ourselves around God. If there's anything you need with that or something else, then come let me know. I'll be right here as we stand and sing together.